Good morning, guys. Guess what time it is? Yeah, you could say it's coffee o'clock, but more important than that, it's time to finally figure out what is your purpose in life. So today is a big day. If you remember, I was telling you in the very first episode, we were right here in the kitchen. I was telling you how I used to sit down with a lot of my friends. I still do. We have coffee and we kind of talk about life, the purpose of life, and what does revelation and our faith have to do with it. Well, today I want to start talking very specifically about the purpose of life. I know that's a huge topic, but I think that we are together up for the challenge. The reason why I say that is because I stumbled across a video several years ago. It came highly recommended to me by a person by the name of Dr. Jeffery Lang. And this video is actually entitled The Purpose of Life. And I thought to myself when I was watching it, come on, how am I going to learn the purpose of life on YouTube? Well, guess what? That's exactly what happened. Now, let me take you back a little bit, just to give you a little bit of background on what I'm talking about here. A lot of us, we go through life thinking we know what we're living for, why we're living, and so forth. But as you get older and older, and as you build up your life experiences, you start questioning some of those initial reasons. You also start gaining some maturity. And by the time you hit, I would like to think your 40s, it's probably important to start figuring out why exactly are you living, because you're kind of running out of time at that point. And that's what happened to me. As I approached my 40s, I started really trying to figure out, all the things that I've learned in life, how do they come together in a way that I feel like this is my goal, this is what I'm living for, and I want to start living very powerfully towards that goal. Well, no one has ever been able to explain to me the purpose of life better than this one 90-minute video that I saw. And I will tell you right now, I have watched a lot of videos in my lifetime. I've read a lot of books, watched videos, listened to podcasts, all on kind of this transformational kind of stuff from the Islamic tradition and so forth. And yet, no one broke it down for me the way Dr. Jeffery Lang did. And so what I would like to do today, and for the next several episodes, it'll probably take maybe up to 10 episodes to go through this one talk of his and break it down for you step by step so that you too might have the same reaction that I did when I listened to this talk. See, in popular culture, there's this idea that if you're trying to find out the purpose of life, you got to climb this long, tall mountain, get to the top, you find this bearded guy, and he kind of just imparts on you the purpose of life. Well, that bearded guy for me is Dr. Jeffery Lang. Dr. Jeffery Lang is a mathematics professor at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. He is a PhD, and he specifically focuses on algebraic geometry. Now, I looked at that when I was looking him up, and I was thinking, algebraic geometry, how hard can that be? I know algebra and I know geometry. If you put them together, that's like 9th grade math, isn't that? Well, I actually looked it up to see what exactly is algebraic geometry, and what I found out is that it's something that I don't even understand. Just looking at the Wikipedia entry, it says algebraic geometry is a branch of mathematics that classically studies zeros of multivariate polynomials. That's where I stopped. I don't even understand what that means. Long story short, the kind of math that Dr. Lang teaches is the kind of math the rest of us look at and say, that doesn't even look like math. It's just a bunch of letters and numbers, and I don't even know what that is. Regardless, Dr. Lang has a very fascinating story, and his talk, The Purpose of Life, is 90 minutes where he takes you through his life journey from his moment when he was born a Catholic to his journey into atheism, and then how he finally stumbled on the Qur'an and struggled with the Qur'an to figure out why is he here. Now, I encourage you all to watch the entire video from start to finish if you can. That's the homework for today, and I'm going to put the link below. But if you cannot do that, if you don't have the time for it, or you're not following along, I am going to go with you step by step and break down for you exactly what I like to call the Lang hypothesis. Sounds kind of mathematical, doesn't it? We're going to talk about the Lang hypothesis, and I'm going to build out to you his proof for the purpose of life. It's very convincing. It's very much in accordance with the traditional Islamic understanding. It's actually, to me, is pure Islam at its core. And I want to present that to you, and would love to get your guys' feedback. So his story begins Going back to the 1950s and 60s of his childhood, he was the fourth of 5 children. He grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and he begins by describing what it was like living in his house with his mother, who he describes as an angel, and his father, who you're going to hear about in just a second.
Let me start out by mentioning that my mother certainly played no role in my becoming an atheist. My mother was a wonderful woman, a beautiful lady. She had tremendous dignity and class. The neighbors loved her. She was a registered nurse, and she put in many extra hours at the hospital. She worked in the ward that dealt with dying patients. And when I would come and pick her up late from work at night, not all the patients, but many of the patients would drag me over and talk to me and tell me what a wonderful woman my mother was. When she died, her funeral was packed, and person after person that came up to me had a story to tell about my mother and her goodness. Time and time again, people described her as, "Jeff, your mother is a true saint." She was a deeply religious woman, a great mother, a great teacher, a gentle person. She never cursed. I never heard her curse, swore, ever in her whole life. Never heard her speak to anybody rudely or speak about anyone rudely. She was a tremendous example of a truly religious person, and she didn't wear it on her sleeve. It was just slowly but surely you could see it just in her day-to-day interactions with people. My father, on the other hand, was a difficult man. My father, for some strange reason, had this tremendous rage inside him. I don't know where he got it. He had this terrible violence inside him. And every night, he would try to quell that violence with hard drinking. And his drinking, though, only made him all the more volatile. Because my father could be laughing and joking one minute, and he could fly into an angry rampage the next for some unexpected reason. You never know what would trigger it. And once he flew into that angry rampage, it would take, he would just go wild in the house. The house would be in havoc. And he would rage on and on and on, and it would take an awful lot of liquor and several hours before he would finally go to sleep. And this would happen night after night after night. And so my 4 brothers and I was the 4th in line. My 4 brothers and I lived a frightening and precarious childhood. But I'd have to say the worst of it was watching my father regularly taunt and threaten and abuse my mother. And it would happen day in, day in, day in, day out, night in, night out. And it was a never-ending nightmare. You see, it's really not so bad when you're the target of your father's violence. You might think it's bad when a child is the target of their father's violence, but it's really not all that bad. At the moment of attack, you're really not thinking about anything except your own survival. When he's firing punches at you or kicking you on the ground or chasing you throughout the house, or when he's threatening you, "I'm going to hurt you, bad boy," you're not thinking about anything at that moment except escape. While all that's going on, you're not thinking about the aftermath or consequences, the psychological repercussions, or anything like that. And when it's all over, you might even excuse the onslaught because you figure maybe you somehow deserved it. If not for what you did this time, maybe for something you did in the past. You could always put the blame on yourself. But a far worse fear is the terror that overcomes you when you watch your father go after your mother. Because she's the only source of warmth and kindness, of love and protection that you know. And if he were to take that away, from a little boy's standpoint, then you've lost everything. But far worse than the fear is the guilt. And it comes over you from several directions. First of all, there's the guilt that comes at you upon you from the growing antipathy you have towards your father. Because we're taught to love and respect our parents, and we are born with this natural bonding attachment to them. But when you watch something like this happen night after night after night, and this rage is growing inside you, You're being pulled in opposite directions. Then there's also, of course, the guilt that comes when you think that you might be the cause of this night's violence. Maybe something you said or did that you didn't even realize triggered it. Maybe just your father's dislike of you triggered an argument between your mom and him that is now raging on downstairs. But the worst guilt of all, and it is by far the very worst, is knowing that you did nothing to stop your father from hurting your mother. Because while he raged on against your mother downstairs, you hid in your bed and you trembled underneath the covers. Maybe you whimpered and you cried and you put the pillow on your head. And thus, you traded personal respect for personal safety. And with each such incident, you come to realize with ever greater and greater clarity, you come to realize your own weakness, your own impotence, your own incompetence, your own worthlessness, your own cowardice. And the hate grows and festers inside you, not only for the man that you call father, but for yourself as well. It is a terrible, terrible thing to make a young boy choose between his mother and himself. It is extremely unfair.
What an incredibly moving introduction. And this is something about Dr. Lang which I really appreciate. His sincerity, his candor, and just his openness talking about his own personal journey is actually incredibly refreshing, especially when you listen to a lot of talks about, just the specifics of faith and so forth. It's kind of nice to hear someone just tell their story from their heart. And that's what Dr. Lang is giving us here. Now, as you can imagine, like he says, it's a terrible thing to make a little boy choose, right, between himself and his mother. And this experience that he had as a child, that's enough for any child to lose faith in God. Why would God, who is supposed to be amazing, right, as he's learned in Catholic school, why would God allow for his mother to be abused and for him to be abused? This is a reason that a lot of people leave religion and turn to atheism, because you can't believe that God would allow for such a miserable existence. Very important question. And this gets into the idea of the problem of suffering, something that we are going to be talking about here, because the problem of suffering, how can a good God create sin, evil and suffering in the world? That is a question that has driven so many people to atheism. Now, continuing with this lecture, I want to talk about where he goes from here.
When I was little, I used to daydream about life without my father. I just wanted the violence to go away. I wanted not to be afraid anymore. I felt like I was trapped in a bad dream and there was no way out. And so I prayed to God again and again and again to remove my father from our lives. But he was always there, and very soon I began to wonder if God really was. I could not fathom why God would subject my mom to such lifelong punishment. I could not imagine what great sin she must have committed, or that we, her children, must have committed to deserve my father. I didn't have the maturity to sort out such questions, but I had enough fear and anger to provoke them. I was too young to see the wisdom in allowing my mom to suffer the violence and abuse of my father. I was too young to understand why God would let innocent children tremble night after night after night in their beds, fearing that they might not see their mother the next morning. I was too young to see how the mercy of God could even extend to my father with all his terrible failings. All I could see in my world was chaos and violence and fear, and so it became easy for me to question the existence of God. And I began to do that at a very early age. I think I'll even say that the turmoil of the 60s and 70s, that's the age when I was a teenager, in the late 60s, early 70s, only reinforced my skepticism. When John and Robert F. Kennedy were assassinated, or Martin Luther King was gunned down, when Vice President Agnew was kicked out of office and Richard Nixon soon after him, when the race riots erupted in city streets like mine, and gang fights erupted in our cities, many of those which I was involved in, when I saw the bizarre and senseless carnage of Vietnam, they all confirmed the lesson that was already ingrained in me and that my father had taught me so well, that the world is dominated by random, consuming, undiscriminating violence. And very soon I began to ask why. Why would God make it that way? Why wouldn't he just pop us into heaven from the first and spare us all this suffering? Why does he let little children in Vietnam get napalmed and run down the street naked on fire when they had done nothing to deserve it? Why does he let the race riots go on? Why does he let the leaders be assassinated? Why does he just let the violence go on and on and on for people who had nothing to do with it? It wasn't of their own making. Why didn't he just make us angels and pop us into heaven if he could make us angels, which I was always taught he could? Why did he make us so susceptible to sin? Why didn't he make us impervious to it, like he made the angels? Is this the best world he could create, I thought? Is this the most perfect world he could create for our existence, for our beginning? I just couldn't figure it. And all the explanations I received from priests and doctors and lawyers, from whoever, spoke to me or taught me, they just didn't make sense to me. In any case, so I became an atheist when I was 16, even though I was going to Catholic school at the time. Declared myself an atheist in one class. It was a confrontation between me and a priest. We were talking about God and the purpose of life. And I expressed my views, and he said, well, then you don't believe in God. I said, well, I guess I don't. And then through my junior and senior year of high school, I got an F in religion, even though I continued to do very well on the tests.
So there you have it. I mean, just for a second, close your eyes and just try to imagine what this person is going through that difficult of a childhood. And unfortunately, for many of you, you don't even have to close your eyes. You don't even have to imagine that, because unfortunately, there are many of you watching right now who have been through equally difficult situations, if not worse. A lot of us have health issues. Maybe we've lost children or lost pregnancies. Maybe we struggle in relationships. We don't talk to our parents anymore. Maybe we have a father or a grandfather with Alzheimer's and they don't even know who we are. I mean, it can be a very personal story, or even if you go beyond your family and your friends, just look at society in general. There's genocide, police brutality, lynchings. We're talking about in the 21st century right now. Genocide in the 21st century, it's absolutely happening. Children in Yemen are being bombed. They're starving to death. There's pandemics all over the world. How is it possible that a good God, a loving God, a benevolent God would allow for all of this suffering in the world? This is such a big question. And I want to leave you guys today with that question. And I'm wondering how many of you can answer that question in a really satisfying way. And you don't get to say, oh, this is God's way, and who are we to understand God's way? At some level, yes, I understand that. And from the Islamic tradition, yes, we do have that understanding that we can never fully understand God's motives and why the world is the way it is. But that's not satisfying enough for most of us. Because if you're talking to someone who's leaving faith, and there are a lot of people who are leaving faith, we have to be able to address that question of how would a good, benevolent God, we say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, how would Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the merciful, the compassionate, how could he possibly allow for all the wars that have happened, and for all the innocent children to have died, and all the drug cartels to have just slaughtered countless people? How could a benevolent God have allowed that? I want you to start sharing your comments with me in the comment section below, and I want to see what you guys come up with, okay? Because this is really key to the beginning of Dr. Jeffery Lang's story. In the next episode, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how he dealt with that issue, the problem of suffering in the world, and how did that lead him to ultimately open up the Qur'an. So I hope you guys are enjoying this. If you want, go ahead and watch the rest of that video that's linked below. You will see the answers to what he is saying. But for the rest of you, stick around, and even those of you who watched it, I'm going to break this all down into its components here so that you can finally look at all the pieces, put it together, and understand how Jeffery Lang and how now I approach the purpose of life. I will see you guys soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.